guys, welcome back to Lives Vivas. Today we have a very important question that we're going to be talking about, and it is what historical trends led to the rise of nationalism. So, let's dive in. So, although there were political and cultural communities before the Reformation and its aftermath set the stage for the rise of nationalism. So it does this in several different ways. One being religion, warfare and strategy, and language. So a little bit of historical context before we start is that the Reformation begins in 1517. And then, we kind of have this big deal where we talked a little bit about last week, where we have a lot of, just debate and different people coming up with different views on things and stuff like that. We have, Martin Luther, who is the most famous one. We have John Calvin, Jan Hus, Zwingli. We have all these guys that are just kind of coming up with different things that they believe. And, it begins this Reformation. So in 1522, though, we have a first outbreak of the violence in the religion. And it's really just like Catholics against Protestants. And it's just this violent outbreak that the Catholics and Protestants are kind of literally enemies and they're fighting against each other. And then in 1555, we have this attempt for peace at Augsburg, which I'll be talking about a little bit later, but it's kind of an attempt for peace, but it doesn't really work. And in 1618, we have this 30 years of war that breaks out. And then finally in 1648, we have the peace that just kind of doesn't unify, but it just ends the warfare between the Protestants and the Catholics. So that's just a little bit of historical context. Nationalism really kind of comes into play. So nationalism is this idea that people, if they've never met each other, but they're like both German, then like they have a connection, and you kind of have this picture in your head, like this is the German, like this is a German, like this is what Germany looks like, or this is what an English person looks like. And so you just have this like unification around where you're from and your kind of nationality versus what used to be your religion or your political stance. Your political, what's it called? Like hierarchy, like where you stood in the hierarchy. But nationalism just really comes into play in three ways, and the first way being religion. So Luther, he disapproves of the power of the papacy, which we kind of know, he is one of kind of his main points, that he finds this papacy very corrupt. And the German princes really come alongside of Luther and agree with him, but not because they believe in his ideas, but they just believe in it for political power. The papacy had a lot of power in the religious and political side, and so the princes, the German princes were able to kind of come in and help Luther and kind of take some of their power back. So this led to an alliance between both of them, and it was really used for political and religious power. For example, we can see this with Henry VIII, who created his own church, which is now Anglicanism, and he created his own church because he wanted to get a divorce. And so he was like, you know what? Luther's right. The church is corrupt. And then he's like, I'm getting a divorce. So you can see it through there. We can see it through the religious wars that broke out between the Catholics and Protestants, and just like the fight for power. And we also can see it with the Treaty of Augsburg, which established that the kings had the power to create their own religion, which is a very intense and maybe kind of scary view. I'm back. We have this connection between politics and religion, and this allows for nationalism to really develop and come into play. We can see this in different sections of Protestantism, like Lutheranism, Christian Reformed Church, and Presbyterianism. They all have these ethnic subtexts that are kind of really rooted into their beliefs. So there was a lot of little mini states in Europe, and in order to unify them, the princes, particularly in Germany, started to assert their authority over religious issues. Again, this was like with Henry VIII and some other guys that just kind of started to weave their way in to try to unify their land. So after Luther kind of passed away or whatever, the Germanic Protestant states kind of rose up, and the princes that kind of supported Luther took his ideas and really tried to unify their land under them. And so, but Luther just really gives these princes a lot of power, which is not necessarily a good thing, because some of them really abuse that power, like Henry VIII. So Martin Luther, he says, quote, "The ruling princes had a right and a Christian duty to exercise superiority powers over the church," end quote. So Luther really supported this idea of, political leaders coming in and kind of taking over the church. Which they did, but, again, it was kind of a corrupt idea, if you think about it. But, anyways, a kind of an example of this is the Baptists and bootleggers. So Frederick III was an elector of Saxony, and he really defended Luther, not because he believed in his religious, views or anything. He's remained Catholic his entire life, but he wanted this political power, so he supported Luther. And then there was also, Albert of Bourbon, and he was appointed to be the Archbishop of Mainz in 1515. And so Friedrich did not like Albert. Because he was kind of like his, rival. And Luther didn't like Albert because Albert really pushed for indulgences. Excuse me. He really pushed for indulgences, and selling indulgences to kind of, get his state back on top. And Luther, if you read any of his writings or know anything about him, was very, 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 very against indulgences. So Luther does not like Albert, and, there's this thing that says, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." And so Luther befriends Friedrich III, and they have this alliance. So Friedrich is doing it for political reasons. Luther is doing it because he does not like Albert. And so that is that. But our second point on why nationalism kind of rose, and we can see it in today's world, is warfare and strategies. So after the Reformation, Europe was in a ton of religious wars. And of course, if you are in wars, you need weapons. And in order to make weapons, you need money. So you need those, but then you also need an army that you need a loyal army that's not just going to run away, when things get hard. And so the political leaders and the princes of this time really tried to raise up this army, and how they did this was they gave freedom, power, and they kind of created like a passion for an idea, for joining the army. And this was also creating a loyal army, not just some people who were kind of being forced into fighting, but it kind of gave them this unified, nation of, this is, what we believe, and this is what we're going to fight for. And so this really rose and promoted nationalism, because it created a shared identity between people. So that's kind of cool. There were a ton of wars, though. Let's talk a little bit about some of the wars. Were very crazy, but There was, the peasant revolts in 1524, and then there was the wars of religion from 1562 to 1598. There was the English Civil War from 1612 to 1651, and then there was the 30 Years' War, which is probably the most famous one, from 1618 to 1648. So the 30 Years' War was a crazy time. It was a crazy war. It is known in history as one of the most longest and brutal wars. There was over 8 million casualties, and there was just, with that came tons of famine, a ton of disease, and it started out as a religious kind of war, but then it kind of turned into this grab for power and people just trying to grab power. So it really changed everything. It changed the geopolitical set of Europe. It changed the role of religion and the nation states in society. So one guy that's kind of important in this was named Gustav Abifolus. But he lived from 1594 to 1632, and he was a military commander during the 30 Years' War. This is a quote, and it says, quote, "He went on to lay the foundations of the modern Swedish state and made it a major European power," end quote. So he really kind of impacted the 30 Years' War and brought in modern techniques that we still use in modern warfare and strategies that we still use. But overall, just the 30 Years' War really, really changed and impacted Europe, and it also kind of gave everybody in their, land this unification and this nation, view, and it created this nationalistic views and made that kind of implanted. So our third point is language. So nationalism can be seen in countries unifying their language. I think we see this a little bit in Rome with Charlemagne, who really wanted to bring in like a unification of language, and he wanted people to be able to read and learn. I think that this can kind of be seen too, that they had the printing press now, and so that played a huge role in this because, books and writings could be more easily made and more easily gotten by more people. And so you can see, that this kind of unifying of language really unified the people in a nation. So especially in England and Germany, you see this. If you look at their languages pre-Reformation, you see a lot of, scattered little states with their own little languages. But then they kind of just combined after this into like one main language. But this also kind of leads to the downfall of Latin. People would read some old Latin, if they had their old texts, but nothing was really being written in Latin anymore. This is a Christopher Mustaca says, quote, "People were becoming more literate and reading newspapers on a daily basis in order to share information. Since they didn't want to learn Latin, the printers quested the demands of the consumers, and newspapers printed in local languages," end quote. So the news was, there wasn't really any more of like a Greek or Latin foundation. It was just kind of, your own region, your own nation, what people would read. So literacy rates in Germany and Britain went from 7% to 16%, which is a huge jump. And it's just very interesting if you listen to different accents, like the Yorkshire accent or, different accents. They don't even sound like English, But you can really see this in German and English, that it's really a family of languages, and depending on which region you're in, it's a different, style of how they talk. You can see this, like, in America, we have, the South, the Southern, howdy. And you have, like, the Midwest, talking, which is kind of the way that people imitate Americans. Or you have, like the beach girl, like, oh my gosh, valley girl talk. So there's different ways like Americans talk, but we have, if you were to ask someone from Europe, you'd be like, what is an American accent? And they might do, a Midwest accent. And that's kind of like the universal language of like, oh, this is how Americans talk. So this is kind of like how you can see this in Germany and English, just like through the different accents. Some of them don't even sound like the same language, like the Yorkshire accent or something is very different and does not even sound like English. It's crazy, but it is English, and it's just like kind of a subgroup of the English, the main English language that is really what people think of when they think of English. So that is it for this week's Viva. Although, we can see this political and cultural and religious communities before the Reformation and its aftermath really sets the stage for the rise of nationalism. And they do this in several ways. One being religion, warfare and strategy, and language. So that is it for this week's Viva. Thank you so much, Sarah. You're amazing. I will see you guys on Wednesday. Bye.